Yeah, you know what? That's been the hardest part, I think, throughout the course of my whole career. And as you get older, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, as you get more experience, I've learned to balance my life a little bit better while still kind of focused on the main goal. Because obviously, you can't avoid the work to get to where you're trying to get to and
Mm-hmm.
accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. And in my field, unfortunately, that means a ton of sacrifice from family and friends. But then again, if you think about living your life and having experiences and having people that you want around you and being able to do cool things that bring you these dividends of experiences as Bill talks about in his book. Like, you have to make time for that in your schedule, which is what I've gotten a lot better at the last few years. It's like, like knowing that, hey, there's a whole other side to life, and not being like tunnel visioned. And that created a lot of stress for me. I mean, as well, like, I mean, my early 20s especially, I was so hyper focused on tennis, which is not a bad thing, right? It's pros and cons, but I definitely felt like it was affecting me on a personal level, and just general, happiness. It was just all work, constantly traveling around the world alone. Sounds great, but it wasn't great, right? You're just like hotel courts, next city, hotel courts, right? So I think, yeah, I've definitely done a lot better with spending time with friends and family. That's kind of what brought more balance to my life the last few years. Actually, one of the things that I like, for some reason, hit me the most when I was reading Tao Zero, was there's a part early on. I don't know what maybe it was third chapter. I can't recall exactly, but where Bill referred to a gift that he gave his grandmother or mother. I think his grandmother, actually, and
I love this story. Yes, I know.
yeah, and it was that he gave her cash, and then ultimately point of the story was that she didn't really use it. It was like, oh, okay, great, but didn't really get anything out of it, because she just kind of saved it, and it's in her
Well,
nature to save.
I think he gave her 10,000. It's possible
10,000.
50, but 10,000. Then like she bought him a sweater or something like at
Something
Christmas.
like,
That was like her
yeah,
big spending on it.
yeah,
Was she just saved it and never used it, and that was like a real revelation for him
yeah.
about this different points and periods of life, and also about what people can do. So that's yeah, that stood out with me as well. That was a very
Yeah,
vivid explanation.
and it was crazy because just really just reading that, I was like, half a page just talking about that. It just, like, some reason, just totally resonated with me and clicked, to the point where I was like, I'm not gonna buy my parents gifts anymore. Or like give them money. I was like, I'm gonna fly them to everywhere where I go. I'm like, so it's like, so right away Christmas, I'm like, okay, mom, dad, like, you guys are never like coming to Wimbledon. I was like, oh, I don't want to bother you. He's like, you're coming. I'm getting you. He's like, you're coming to Wimbledon. You're coming to these events, because they're also getting older, and you want you and I haven't been able to spend too much time with my parents relative to how much I would like to, just given my travel schedule. And
Yeah.
and so I have Bill to thank for that, because I really feel like the next several years, it'll just kind of shift how I look at the value of a gift, and versus the value of, or spending time with somebody, and a value of an experience, right? It's a funny story in a way. It wasn't even so much a tough decision in the sense of, that it ever in doubt that I was going to play tennis. No, it was, the tough decision was that I was no longer going to play soccer, and I loved playing it. That was what made it tough.
Mm-hmm.
And but so the story, I guess, is just that up until the age of 12, really, tennis and soccer were my two main sports. From the age of 5, right when I was walking, holding a racket, I was always tennis pro, tennis pro, tennis pro. That was never, it was basically my job from, I would consider it, again, relative to being a kid, but I kind of viewed it like, okay, this is my work, like from a very young age. And soccer, I played just as much soccer as I did tennis, and that was fun. That was pure, like, okay, like, go play soccer, have fun, learn some other skills that'll apply to tennis with footwork and whatever. And then when I was 12 years old, I think I was 11 or 12. I have to talk to my dad, but I was playing rep soccer for my town, Vernon, BC, and we were somewhere in the province, and playing a match. And I at one point I got a breakaway, and I was running and the defenseman couldn't keep up, and so he like elbowed me in the face, and I got a black eye. And I think I'll never forget, we were driving home, and maybe this is just how my brain processed it. And but we were driving home, and it was like the first time that soccer got in the way of tennis. And then my dad was just kind of like, okay, like, you know, we're no more soccer, you know, and I was just like, oh,
yeah, that's
this is so funny. Just this question alone, I feel like could be a 1 hour podcast. But there's so many things that are flying through my head when you ask that, in terms of, because I've had conversations over the years with people about, you know, even comparing other sports, and again, not having necessarily that much context from the other sport, but at least internally in tennis. And there's so many different variables and so many different, obviously you don't have to be good at, you don't have to tick off all the boxes, obviously, right. But like there's, you know, obviously, so okay, work ethic goes without saying. I mean, you have to be tough, you have to have tough skin, you have to be, you have to be tough mentally, you have to be strong, because you're basically in an arena, it's a one-on-one combat in a way, not physical necessarily, like you're not beating somebody up, but you need to be able to handle a lot of stress. I mean, you're traveling all year. It is a very stressful situation to be in. I mean, you're going like on a court to go one-on-one against somebody, and you're going week after week after week. You have to push the body, so you have to be able to go through, you know, physical pain and handle that well. That's, you know, similar to other sports for sure, or anything really, right? Like the 10,000 hours. I mean, that you can't escape that. I mean, anything, any aspect of life, if you want to be successful, if you gotta put in the hours and like work your ass off, right? I mean, it's kind of like, you know, sometimes you'll have some people that will become rich, but I wouldn't consider that success if they got there, you know, like people can get rich without being successful, in my view, at least with how I view success, right? I mean, if you get super lucky, or let's say you win the lottery, or let's say you put something on a stock, or let's say you inherit something or whatever, right? So obviously, but in terms of reaching a certain level of success, I don't think you know, the hard work is not something you can avoid. So this is another really interesting one, and it kind of ties into the last question, because just given how many different variables there are in tennis, how many different things you have to be good at and focus on, and how much energy and time that you have a day to be able to do everything. So I think, you know, so whether that's, you know, working on your technique, your physical aspect, your mental aspect, you know, recovering, also being able to take time away and adjust, and then, you know, spending time on data analytics, you know, it's tough to fill. It's really tough. And I think that's where tennis is a little bit behind the other sports. And I don't know if it ever can be the same, and if the structure stays the way it is, because you know, there's only so much time in a day, and spending time on one aspect will take away from another, right? Just because there's, like I said, there's only, unfortunately, 24 hours in one day. And right. I think, but it is becoming more common in tennis. And I know that especially the top guys are, you know, going more in depth into the data, and they have their own teams, obviously, that are looking into it. I'm now working, as of this year, or as of, I guess, middle last year, working with a data team as well. So they kind of, you know, connect closely with my coach. They go through, every time I have an opponent, they'll go through, okay, these are some of his tendencies. And it's tough. It's a fine line, because you also can't as a tennis player, you can't have like overload of information, because you got to kind of dial in on 2 or 3 key things in that match. So it's best that it's through the coach, that the coach gets the data, kind of looks through it, and then picks the 2-3 things that he thinks are most important to tell the player. Because the player at the end of the day has to be on the court and adapting constantly. You're problem solving throughout, you know, from the beginning to the end of that match, because you're playing against a person, you know, that is going to be shifting his own tendencies. If he sees suddenly that you're covering something, or if he's like, you know what, this guy knows that I'm doing this, or you pick up on patterns. So you also have to be smart with when you use that information, at what times, and so it's, but it is coming into tennis. but definitely behind other sports.
I feel like the individual sports, it's a little like when you're in a basketball team or a soccer team, yeah, there's guys around and you're kind of sharing the burden. But the mental side, I feel like, especially a lot of training individually, hitting balls, it just seems like it can be a bit tough to really, you know, the social side of it and to stay positive. And maybe, how do you deal with that, the mental side of tennis and also preparation with being an individual sport?
Yeah, definitely is very tough. I think, you know, working with a sports psychologist is kind of commonplace, you know, for tennis players. You know, I think some more so than others, obviously. I think, you know, a big part of it as well, as I, you know, alluded to earlier, you know, earlier on, is finding the balance in your life. I think when you overload yourself with stress or overload yourself with work and flying, just because it is such a high stress, high pressure job, you know, I feel like I've been much happier and much, you know, just more of a balanced individual ever since I started to, you know, really carve time away throughout my year to have fun with my friends and my family and do fun. And I think that's really helped, honestly, because you also created another little bit of my identity, you know, has shifted a little bit the last 4 years, I would say, since my back surgery. Prior to that, I was a Vasek tennis player, and every match was like life or death. And if I won, everything was amazing. If I lost, everything was shit. You know? Yeah. There was another kind of event apart from my surgery, you know, a couple of years prior to that also just gave me a complete paradigm shift mentally, where, you know, since then, especially, I mean, to your point, any time I've kind of faced adversity or perceived adversity, right? It's all what you're, you know, I every negative situation, if you can look at it in a positive way, because I've had several perceived negative events in my life that have just created another path or something, or that I've learned so much from, that I've developed and that I became a better person, let's say, or so at this point, it's like anything that happens, I just have that mentality, like, okay, this is good. This is going to be good for something. Obviously, apart from, you know, tragedies, which is another thing, but you know, you can really just, everything is good. You know, even sure. Bad things is good. You know, and I tell some of my friends sometimes they have something that really, you know, like, oh, they get all stressed out about something that happened, whether they get fired. This recently, someday, I forget what it was, and I was like, hey, like, you have no idea what this is going to be good for. Like, you think this is bad right now, like, watch, like 1 year, it'll take a totally different route, and you'll be like, oh, thank God that happened, right? Or something. Yeah. So if you can kind of approach life from that perspective, not, you know, I think it really just makes the journey a lot more enjoyable.